Ben Shapiro, thank you so much for joining me on the Become a Media Maven podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. It's always an honor to talk to the Maven herself.
You are funny. We chatted on the MarTech podcast, which was an amazing chat. Most people subscribe to at least 7 podcasts. If they're not already subscribed to MarTech, why should they be? What do you do over there?
Well, it's my favorite one. I'm a little biased. The MarTech podcast talks about all of the different ways that marketers use technology to grow their businesses, and then also how they get ahead as a marketer and hopefully improve their career. So we cover a wide variety of marketing topics, everything from how the biggest companies in the world use data and technology to market themselves, all the way down to how people that are independent marketers, should market their startup brands and figure out the basics of their marketing strategy. It really is a broad technology-centric marketing show.
And why technology?
Because that's the way the world, because we're all talking about bits and data and how we can do automation and do more with marketing through technology, as opposed to, hoping and praying, try to be a little bit more sophisticated and think about what actually works and setting up systems to make it easier on the marketers.
And you publish a lot of podcasts. Talk to me about your schedule and how you make that happen, because that's very impressive to me.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually, when I think about content production, we publish 12 episodes a week that are across 2 podcasts, and that's outside of doing any guesting like this. So I spend a lot of time in front of this microphone. I have a comfy chair. And one of the things I talk about being data-driven as a marketer, and when I started creating the MarTech podcast, it was an experiment, and it was meant to be a lead generation piece of content or a content platform to try to get people to hire me as a marketing consultant. And what we ended up finding was that originally when I started launching the content, I would do these long Joe Rogan style hour and a half interviews, getting into the weeds, kind of like short movie style podcasts about, somebody's career. And a lot of people would listen to the first 15 minutes and then they'd drop off. And so I said, well, what happens if we cut the content to be the same amount of content, but just break it into 2 parts? And people would listen to 15 to 25 minutes for each of the 2 episodes. And so that made me realize that there is a shorter form content that, our content is relatively dense and people can only retain the information for 15 to 25 minutes. So let's just create our content in 15 to 25 minute increments. When you came on the show, we recorded 2 pieces of content, but we talked for an hour. And so that's 2 25-minute pieces of content. Now I have to, Monday and Tuesday for next week booked, and I can sit down with somebody for an hour and a half and break the conversation into 5 different pieces of content. So for me, a lot of this, when you're getting into how do you create that much content or how much content should I create, you have to understand how the channel works. We found that with the density of our content, people only wanted 15-minute increments. So we just do a lot of 15-minute increments, and I kind of record them in bulk.
And talk to me about the work that it takes to actually edit these and put these out for people who don't have podcasts, because that's like, just to do one, it's a lot of work, and it's more work to break up that one and to publish so much.
Yeah. The first episode you're ever going to do is the one that you're going to work the most on. And you work less and less over time. And, when I did the first episode for the MarTech podcast, I recorded the content. It took me an hour. I actually probably did about an hour of prep for the interview. Then I recorded the content. Then I spent about 3 hours editing it. And then I spent another hour publishing it, and then another hour promoting. Okay, this episode took 10 hours. Now, if I were going to do that, that's 120 hours for 12 pieces of content, which is what we publish per week. Obviously, that's unreasonable. I have a wife and 2 small children at home. I'm not spending 120 hours working in a given week. So what I did was I figured out how to do it myself the first time. And then I said, okay, well, it took me 3 hours to do the editing. why don't I just go hire a professional editor and spending 3 hours of my time, which is worth, let's say, $100 and $200 an hour, whatever you just decide your billable rate is. I can go find an editor on Upwork or Fiverr to edit my content, do a better job than I was going to do, and it's going to cost me $15 to $25 an hour. So for me, the math was, if I'm going to do this podcast, I could spend 3 hours of my time, or I could pay roughly $50 per episode to edit the content. Well, it makes a lot more sense for me to just outsource it. I have to have the capital to be able to do that, but it's really a question of how valuable is your time? How much time are you going to spend doing the activity? I can't replace myself as the podcast host for my show. I have to do that part. But in my process, what happens is, we have an automated system that helps us with the scheduling, right? We have a calendar link where people come in. I show up for the interview. I have a template that I use for the introduction that I've been reusing, and I'm just basically swapping out the person's name, title, writing a line or two of copy here. So the prep for the interview in advance doesn't really take a long time. And then once the interview is done, I have a system. We used to use Airtable. Now we use Monday.com. But it allows us to say, okay, what's the current status of this piece of content? This interview gets broken up into 2 pieces and hasn't been edited yet. If it has not been edited, then I tag the content editor, and he goes through and he turns the piece of content into the recording into an actual piece of content. And then when he's done, he tags somebody else who's responsible for taking that content and writing a summary. And then when she's done, she hands it to the person who takes the summary of the piece of content and puts it on our website and schedules it for publication. And when that person's done, they send it to somebody else to send emails to the guest, letting them know that the piece of content's ready and when it's going to be published. And so, moral of the story here is I did, all 8 of those steps the first time and figured out what I wanted the process to be. And then I broke the process down into discrete parts, and I found people who are talented and experts in their field, but less expensive than I am, to go do the work, and I'm able to go do the stuff that actually makes money, or do the stuff I have to, which is record the content. So figuring out what you want to do, documenting it, and finding less expensive labor to help you, work your processes and do it well is really the way to expand your content production.
And something like this, obviously, you're paying for the help. You have a lot of help. So if you are going to put this much time, effort, and money into it, you want to be making money off of what you're doing. You want to be using that podcast as a lead generator and a revenue maker. So talk to me about how you and other people like you who do invest so much time and money into their podcasts, how they're making money.
Yeah, so I'll say that I'm an extreme example, right? My business is podcast content production. And so that's why I'm doing 12 episodes per week. Most people are doing 1, 2, 3, maybe 5, but probably not. You don't have to spend that much time doing the content production or invest that much money into doing it. My business is an ad-supported business. So we have podcast sponsors that come in and pay us for creation of advertorial content. We have them as our guests, and we call them out as paying sponsors when we interview them. We have them we have host-read advertising, which is me reading the ads for them and helping them share the purpose of their products and their services. And then we do some more sophisticated stuff because we're a marketing podcast, that we have the ability to understand who's listening to the podcast, and we can either retarget those people with other ads, like, right, I can find out who's listening on my podcast and then target them on Facebook, or we can find people that look like our podcast listeners and share that data with the sponsors so they can then go do their own marketing. That's our model, and that's not what most people are doing. Most people are doing a podcast because they want to be able to network with the guests, right? They want to be able to make connections that they wouldn't have been able to make otherwise. They're trying to find new business. Most of the time that's through the guests that they're interviewing, or they want to own the conversation and be positioned to be an expert. And they're just sort of hoping that that content produces awareness and affinity for their brand, and so that helps to drive sales. Everyone has a different reason for producing their podcast. Not everybody is running a media business like we are, but we have a host of products where it's our sponsorship model that really is what drives revenue.
And how did you get into all of this? Like, what did you do before you were recording 12 podcasts a week?
Can I tell you a funny story about the first podcast I ever did?
Oh, please do.
It starts off with I got a little drunk.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Why? Were you like nervous?
No. I was at a party. And
you just thought, this is a great time to
I didn't have kids yet, so I could, not worry about how much I was drinking. All I had to do was, go home and not embarrass myself in front of my girlfriend at the time. Actually, it was my wife, and she was pregnant, now that I think about it.
So how long ago was this?
Let's see. She was pregnant, and Albie's about to turn 4, so it was about 5 years ago.
Okay, all right.
So I have too many cocktails, or just enough, depending on, who you ask. And I had to pour myself into a Lyft. And I was driving through the suburbs of San Francisco, and I was feeling a little gregarious. So I sat in the front seat, and I started talking to my Lyft driver. And I was asking about, who he is and where he's from. And he said that he was from North Korea. Well, I'd never met anybody from North Korea because it's, a communist country.
They're not allowed out.
Not allowed out, and they're not allowed in the United States, even if they go out. So I'm like, no, you're wrong. You don't mean North Korea. There's a translation issue. You mean South Korea. He had a very heavy accent. And he's like, no, I'm from North Korea. I defected. I got caught by the Chinese government, brought back to North Korea, got put in a slave camp and escaped, and then made my way to South Korea and became a refugee. And the United Nations helped me get to the United States of America. And I was like, you got to tell me the rest of this story. And so it was just, this guy is amazing. Chol Charles is his nickname, Ryu. And the podcast is called the A Long Road Home Podcast. So we had this amazing conversation. It's San Francisco, 5 years ago. So inherently we got stuck in traffic. We got about 45 minutes to chat. And I wanted to hear the end of the story. So I said, hey, do you want to tell the story to other people? He said, yes. I'm like, I'm going to turn this into a podcast. I'm going to make the next Serial. Here's my card. If you want to tell this story, I will record it and I'll publish it for you. And it was just an art project. And so I didn't have microphones. I didn't know what software to use. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I was just experimenting. I was just, passionate about hearing this story and helping him tell it to other people, that I created the A Long Road Home podcast and did it as a side project. These are the things that you can do when you don't have kids. I just, got drunk at a party, listened to some guy telling about how he escaped from North Korea, and said, I'm going to record this and tell it to the world. That's how I got started podcasting.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so what were you doing at the time? Were you an entrepreneur then, or did you have a job then when you were taking lifts with North Koreans?
Yeah, I had just left my last startup job. I got frustrated because, I'm here in Silicon Valley and everybody wants to work for the cool startup jobs. And it's like work all day and all night and take less pay. And the angel investors and the venture capitalists yell at the CEO, and he turns around to the marketer and says, it's all your fault. Or at least that's how I felt. And it just wasn't working out for me. I was just tired and stressed out. I didn't want to live that life. And so I left to become, and I don't know what. I just started taking on short-term projects, and it turned out that was the start of my consulting practice. And I ended up having companies hire me to help them with brand development and marketing strategy projects. And I'd go work for one company for 2 to 3 months, and another one for 6 to 8 weeks, and another one for a week or two. And those projects just kind of piled up on each other. And the next thing you know, I was running a consulting business, and then on the side, I was making this podcast thing because it was fun.
And talk about, let's change gears a little bit, because you are a wealth of information when it comes to, I like marketing technology. I like those together because marketing is so freaking broad and it can mean so many things. And marketing technology can mean a lot of things. But when people start their own marketing, I have a lot of listeners who are side hustling. Maybe they still work full time. They could have just started their agency or their business, whatever it is. They can't really afford, or they can't afford, but they still have that, beginner money mindset. Mm-hmm. So they need to handle a lot of that marketing themselves. Mm-hmm. What are some things that you see that people do right and that people do wrong?
Let me tell you how it should work. And what do people do right and what do people do wrong? My answer is like, we all screw something up, and
That's how you learn.
yeah, right. Like everybody does stuff right and wrong. The sort of way to do marketing successfully, in my opinion, is you start off with the foundational stuff. You have to understand who you are as a business and what your core strengths are. And I'll use, me getting into podcasting. I was just a naturally talkative person. I felt comfortable being in front of people and putting my voice out there. So podcasts were just an inherent strength for me. It's a good match as a medium. You have to understand what you're good at. And then you have to think about who your customers are. And developing a brand, which is what you need to do first, is understanding the overlap between who you are as an organization, even if you're just one person, and what your strengths are, and what your customers want. And so, the first thing you need to do is go talk to those customers and understand what their needs are, who they are, how they think about products or services in the niche that you're trying to fill, where they look for them, and what they want to hear. And you can just go ask those people those questions, and they'll give you the answers. So, if I'm running a consulting practice focused on growth stage company in Silicon Valley, I need to go interview 10 people that are working at growth stage companies as marketers and talk about what their problems are. Now, you're going to hear some common themes amongst those 10, 15 conversations you're going to have. And so for the example of me running my consulting business, the problem is we relied too much on performance marketing. We were just paying to grow, and now we're spending too much. So we need to think about other ways to grow sustainably and scalably. And so then it becomes, oh, okay, you need to figure out what your brand is. And then you need to develop content marketing strategies that lower the cost of your marketing efforts. That was a common theme that I heard amongst the people that I was targeting, but I had to go talk to them to understand, where are you thinking? What are your problems? Where are you thinking about finding consultants? It turns out they just show up in my inbox. I'm like, I got to show up in your inbox. Now I know my marketing strategies. You got to go set the foundation by talking to your customers and thinking about the overlap between who you are as an organization and what their needs are. That's the marketing foundation. And out of that conversation, you'll unearth what are the things they need to hear. How do I position my product or service? Where are they looking to hear about it? And how do I reach them? Hey, I'm running a clothing brand. Well, how do you look for clothing brands, person that's interested in my type of clothing? They just show up on Instagram. Okay, I need an Instagram profile. I need to go master that one channel. Right? So, to me, it's like understanding this is a marketing podcast. Thinking about marketing is the overlap between your products and services and what your customers' needs are. The technology and the marketing and the sort of the application of the advertising strategy all comes out of who are you as a brand and who are you trying to reach.
This sounds like so simple and so easy to understand. It sounds almost like common sense, but I honestly believe not a lot of people do this. And I think I want to get your feedback on why you think they miss this. I think for two reasons. One, there are so many things to do, so many different things that people just kind of do a little bit in a lot of places. Like they get the shiny object syndrome, like I need to be here and do this and do that. And then I think another reason is that they see these people who look successful online and they say, oh, well, this person's doing this, so I should be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
They never focus in, like, they don't stay in their lane and focus in on what they should focus on.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn as a marketer and an entrepreneur. And it was one of the problems that I was having doing, startup marketing was, I was working in a business to consumer service, kind of a delivery type service. And most of our acquisition was driven through Facebook, but I wanted to be on Facebook and Google and Pinterest and Schminterest and Snapchat and Snapchat. And, we had to manage all these different profiles, and instead of saying, okay, we're going to do Facebook, we're going to cultivate this channel, and we're going to cultivate our organic growth channel. I think the first thing you need to think about when you're starting your marketing, where are the customers looking for my products or services? How do I master the one most important channel? how long does it take for me to become effective in that channel, and what are the resources I need? If you're running a B2C brand and you're, a clothing brand, a retail brand, people are looking for clothing, and then most of the time it's discovery through social media. It's through Instagram and Facebook, and maybe you got Pinterest or Snapchat or TikTok, depending on how old you're targeting. You need to not only create a profile and start building some organic growth, having people follow you and starting to engage with the communities there, but you also need to think about your paid media channel, right? Your advertising. I would not start advertising in Google and Facebook. Facebook and Instagram are the same thing, but Google, Facebook, Instagram, and then also start doing radio ads and podcast ads and billboards and all these things. Like, you just got to do the one channel first and get that channel to be ROI positive and try to start to think about scale. Now, you don't just want to only invest in performance marketing and the stuff you have to pay for. You want to be doing that so you can get some bodies in the door and spend just as much as you need to keep the lights on and to start showing that your business works, but then also start cultivating what I call organic growth channels. This is your content marketing, your influencer outreach, your public relations, all the stuff where it's like, great, I am investing in developing how people think about my brand and the brand's reach by creating my own content that people can discover, or working with other influencers that have a platform to get them to write about me. Really, if you're doing your one real good performance marketing channel that if you get it right, your company is going to grow, and then starting to develop organic growth. So at some point, as your performance marketing channel scales to the point where you're like, I don't want to spend this much money, now you're starting to see your organic stuff kick in, and that becomes more valuable to you over time, and you can start decreasing the amount you're paying for your advertising. Cultivate one channel at a time on the paid side, and then cultivate your organic growth channels that take a long time to develop.
I love that. That's great advice. And if you do it all at once, then it's hard to tell exactly what's working sometimes, because I mean, it's even like when you A/B test something, like you don't A, B, C, D, E, F, G test something. It's an A/B test for a reason.
Yeah, the truth is nobody knows what they're doing, right? Everybody is developing their expertise from square one. The platforms often change so fast that if you're starting from square one to learn Facebook, you're at a little bit of a disadvantage if you've never run a Facebook ad. You have some learning to do, but the platform's going to change in 6 months from now, and everybody's playing catch up on what the new features are. Learn the fundamentals. Start with the new features. You're going to have a new advantage, and you'll have an advantage because you're focusing on what the new hotness is. And you just got to stay with it. We all started from nothing at one point. I just wouldn't start from nothing on 5 channels. I would just say, I'm going to master this one channel. And then I'm going to, once I hit the level of scale, start to think about other ways that I can, either get somebody else to manage this for me so I can cultivate a new channel, or just taking on more work and doing 2 things at once.
And I feel like you brought it full circle. Like, we talked about how you can release 12 podcast episodes a week. And I think it all started with you focusing on that one thing and going all in on that one thing. You figured out a way to outsource it so you can have time to move on to the next.
If I had a piece of advice for anybody about how to save money and scale a marketing channel, it is mastering the ability to document a process, find someone less expensive to do the basic blocking and tackling for you, and then have a system for reporting, sort of automating the process. And this is something we talk about a lot on the MarTech podcast, is the concept of marketing automation, right? How do I do my one task and then check off the box, and then the next person in line, right, is the Henry Fordification. It's the what do they call it?
Your assembly line.
Thank you. The Henry Fordification, your assembly line for your content production, right? I cannot do content production, editing, copywriting, and publication while doing ad sales and marketing and team management. That's too much. Mm-hmm. I record the content. The rest of the team takes care of their stuff. And I don't even listen to the podcasts, right? I have the conversation. I know what was said. If something was needed to be
Same.
edited, I will know while the conversation is happening. So
Same.
get
I do the same thing. I'm shocked at how many people listen to their podcasts. I'm like, well, weren't you there?
I listen to the good ones. Like I'll go back and re-listen to our conversation from the MarTech podcast because it'll show up in my podcast feed, and I'll be like, "Oh, that was an interesting conversation. I do want to hear that one." But most of the time, I'm like, "Oh, okay. I've already listened to this conversation, and now I can listen to the sports podcast and relax and enjoy myself, or I could re-listen to a work conversation I already had." Nobody goes back and listens to their old meetings. It's just not practical.
That's true. Makes sense. Ben, anything else you want to add that I should have asked?
Anything else that you should
That's
have
my reporter question. I always do that on
asked?
TV.
Oh man, no, I am not the political podcaster Ben Shapiro. Um, I get that a lot.
I'm going to link to this, Ben, in the show notes. So you'll get the right one.
You know, when we were talking before the podcast started, you were telling me a little bit about your audience, and they are the self-starter crew. And I went from working at eBay to starting my own startup. Right, I went from a big, 15,000 person company to a company of one, and I've done entrepreneurship projects a couple of times now, and the MarTech podcast and the Voices of Search podcast, the little content empire we're building over here. Um, the most important lessons that I've learned is to understand who your customer is first, right? Focus on what their needs are. Figure out how to do something yourself, document it, document the process, and hand it off to someone else, and try to spend your time building systems that enable less expensive resources or technology to do what needs to be done instead of you trying to manually do everything yourself. If you're constantly doing the same process over and over again, you should be thinking about documenting that and finding somebody else to do it for you. And that's the way to start scaling what you're doing from a marketing perspective.
It's great advice. And it also will help you avoid burnout because that will happen as well. And I do have a couple of podcast episodes with experts in creating standard operating procedures and how to document that and how to put that together so you can build a team. And team building, like for me, I don't think I would still have my PR agency if I didn't build a team. Like I was going crazy 2 years ago. And the only reason it exists today is because of my team.
Yeah,
So 100%.
Fiverr, Upwork, right? There's places where you can find resources, people that are talented, that are around the world, that are working for, it might sound like it's not enough, but like $4, $5, $6, $7 an hour, when the minimum wage here in the United States is $15 an hour. Sometimes you want the local talent. Sometimes you need somebody that understands the market. But there are lots of talented people around the world that their living wage is $3 and you're paying $5 and they're over the moon to have the work. And so it's just the kind of economics of geography. And to me, that's one of the keys to scaling.
Speaking of geography, people, Ben is in California. That's why he said minimum wage is $15. It's
Is
like
it not?
half that. Oh my gosh, Ben, no. It's like half that in other places.
Oh, yeah. I mean, California is its own special beast.
It is very special. Yes, if you want to make $15 an hour, then you can go there, but you're going to be spending a lot more on a lot of other things.
Yeah, but the average bedroom in San Francisco costs $4,500 or something absurd like that. So, you pay for what you get when you move into the Bay Area.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy. It's funny. Okay, well, thanks, Ben. We are going to link to all of your information in the show notes. People can find you at the MarTech podcast. Where else would you like them to go?
Yeah, martechpod.com, or just search MarTech Podcast in any of the podcast app stores. That's the place to find the content. If you're interested in contacting me directly, benjshap.com, benjshap is the consulting website, and there's some contact forms. And my social handle is benjshap as well.
Ben J. Shap. At him on social. Tell him thank you for sharing all of his amazing wisdom with us today. Thank you, Ben.
Christina, it was a blast.